Attorney General flags stay order on VONC. Marape calls on OC to table report. And defectors say sorry.
This is National EMTV News with Helen Sayer.
Good evening and thanks for joining us for Thursday's news. Attorney General Alfred Manasseh has instructed government lawyers to apply for a stay order on the vote of no confidence motion until all matters relating to the doctrine of the separation of powers are dealt with by the Supreme Court. The Attorney General saying the urgent application is not to stop the vote of no confidence, but to ensure the rule of law is respected and observed at all times. The Supreme Court has not set a date for a hearing on the stay order as of yet.
The separation of powers and whether the judiciary can have a say in the national parliament arm of government is what Attorney General Alfred Manasseh says is the reason behind his office filing the stay order.
I know that many people may disagree with this course of action that I have taken. However, I would like our people to understand that it is my duty to ensure that the rule of law is respected and observed at all times, even by Parliament. I want to assure our people that the issues that are before the Supreme Court are critical to our democracy as they seek to clarify the division of power of the three arms of government.
Manasseh said that in his view, the notice of motion of no confidence would be contemptuous of the Supreme Court reference filed by Prime Minister Peter ONeill last December.
Demarcate the roles and functions of the three arms of government, and more particularly how far the courts can go whilst interpreting the Constitution to preserve the principles of separation of powers between the three arms of government. Once we obtain the answers from the Supreme Court, then Parliament will be free to conduct its affairs without interference by the third arm of government.
The Attorney General was questioned on whether preempting the vote of no confidence on behalf of the Prime Minister Peter ONeill was to allow Mr. ONeill to hold on to the top position.
It's not about numbers. It is not about the vote of no confidence. It's about preserving the integrity of the different institutions. And that is critical.
The matters have been lingering since 2016 when the former opposition leader Don Poilier sought a reference in which the court ordered Parliament to deal with the vote of no confidence. The court in 2016 also ordered that future votes of no confidence be dealt with in 7 days, basically rewriting part of parliamentary standing orders. The main sticking point is the argument that the Supreme Court orders of 2016 interferes with the function of one part of the government, the Parliament. Government lawyers are arguing that in the case of the 2016 Poilier ruling, the courts overstepped its boundaries.
There's a series of questions, some of them touching on some decisions of Supreme Court, earlier Supreme Court decisions, which did not deal with some provisions of the Constitution. And so those issues which may have been overlooked, if they had considered those, the decision would have been in a different way. All those issues are being dealt with. And I think the former Attorney General is a learned man and he's considered all of those issues. And
in its current form, the 2016 orders as they stand bind the Speaker to act within 7 days of when a motion is filed and decided upon. Opposition MP Dr. Alan Marape said yesterday in a Facebook video that the Speaker is judicially bound to act on the motion of vote of no confidence. This means that delay could result in the Speaker being held in contempt of court.
It's before the Supreme Court and it is an application at this stage. The court has not given a date as to when it will be heard, but we have requested for an urgent hearing, and as soon as it's fixed for a hearing, obviously you will know through the court process when that happens.
The idea with the stay order being sought is to make sure all the questions are ironed out and the distinction between Parliament and courts is restored before any vote of no confidence is moved on the floor of Parliament. Outside of the legal determination around the VONC, as proven when Parliament resumed and then adjourned to the 28th, the final determination on whether the VONC is viable will depend on who has the majority of members to command the control of the floor when the House resumes. Adelaide Siraks Kari, National EMTV News.
Meanwhile, Prime Minister Peter O'Neill has commented on the stay order, stating it is to allow the courts to clarify the separation of power and the election of Prime Minister. Questions the Prime Minister says needs to be answered before the vote of no confidence.
As you know, in 2016, the court ruling directed Parliament to sit on a specific day, take on a specific motion, nominating a specific person. Those instructions, directions by a court order to Parliament, we feel that is in contradiction to the separation of powers, meaning that Parliament, the executive and the judiciary has got separate powers and they cannot direct each other, especially the functions of those. So those are some of the questions that have been now asked at the references that the former Attorney General submitted to the courts, Mr. Stephen Davis, and those are now been before the courts, and we are seeking the court's directions as to how the rules on what the rules that we should follow when the motions come on the floor, and clearly establish that these particular rulings, because there's a lot of contradiction. It contradicts the invitation by the Governor General after the general election to form government to the highest party that has got the highest number of members of Parliament. So all these are very unclear, and that is why we are now getting the Attorney General to seek interpretation from court. Nobody is stopping any motion whatsoever, but making sure that the guidelines for such a motion must be clearly established, so we all follow one rule.
Former Finance Minister James Marape is appealing to the Ombudsman Commission to table the UBS loan report in Parliament in the next sitting. Mr. Marape said despite being part of the cabinet that processed the loan, he claims he had minimum input in it. He called on the Speaker of Parliament, Job Pomat, to allow the OC report to be debated.
The UBS loan report was all over social media last night and making headlines. Speaking this afternoon in Port Moresby, the former finance minister wants the report be debated on the floor of Parliament. Marape says though the loan was a NEC decision, he pushed for more debate.
I will not be at this point in time able to disclose what has happened, but after the report is tabulated, the entire Parliament must see the report as contained by as led by Ombudsman Commission, and then those of us, if found to be implicated, then we can face the due process as recommended before by independent constitutional office in the Ombudsman Commission. So
the report was completed in 2018. According to an EMTV source, the report was published and circulated to individuals. Former Health Minister and Abo MP Dr. Pukotemu appealed to Speaker of Parliament Job Pomat to allow the report as an agenda in the next sitting.
Everybody is now talking about the report. Some have viewed it through the social media. So the right thing to do is bring it to the Speaker, table it, and it becomes public document, and those who are implied can respond appropriately. That's all we are saying.
In a statement night, Prime Minister Peter O'Neill described the report as leaked information by the opposition to gain support for a change in government. PM O'Neill claims that the Supreme Court dismissed the case and ruled that the government has the right to conduct the economic affairs of the state.
the Prime Minister and leader of government business on the other side table the UBS report as one of the first business. On Wednesday next week, and if they have the numbers, they will not adjourn Parliament. They must be confident of the numbers to allow Parliament to sit right through after 28, at least minimum for 2 weeks.
Jokel Power Jr. National EMTV News.
Member for Pomio Elias Kapavore yesterday officially took office as the new Minister for Health. He takes over from Abao MP Sir Pukotemu, who resigned from this post earlier. As Health Minister, Kapavore says he will not change anything from the department, but continue the work of the outgoing minister.
The official handover takeover ceremony was hosted at the National Department of Health headquarters in the nation's capital. The event saw management and staff of the National Department of Health all attending to see their new minister take office. The member for Pomio, Elias Kapavore, was the Minister for Public Service before being appointed by the Prime Minister to take the post as the new Minister for Health. He takes over from former Minister and member for Abau TwoK Sports, who resigned from the post earlier.
Elias is not a new person to the health sector. He has worked in our hospitals in Vanimo and has held a senior management position in Vanimo Hospital and then rose to the rank of a CEO of the new reform of PHA in Sundown Province. And one of our success stories.
The former Minister TwoK Sports, when officially handing over the office to the new minister, says it is because of the nature of politics in the country that he resigned. But the health of the people of this country is important for nation building.
I think he is one that is very capable of taking over, lead the Ministry of Health and plot out our way forward, and I have every confidence in the new minister to take charge of this very, very important ministry in our country.
One of the projects that the former minister has been focusing on is the Provincial Health Authority. He said most provinces have a provincial health authority. However, only a few provinces still need to set up theirs. He encouraged the new minister to continue with the Provincial Health Authority as it is vital for the delivery of medical supplies to the provinces.
Also, Minister, I request that you conclude the PHA rollout so that we can then say that we will resource you, we will build your capacity. We will provide technical assistance to make sure that PHA is the most important vehicle for delivery. Also, Minister, I conclude the PHA rollout so that we can then say that we will resource you, we will build your capacity. We will provide technical assistance to make sure that PHA is the most important vehicle for delivery.
The new minister also comes with a lot of experience from the health sector in the country. When taking up office yesterday, he said his plan is to implement a national health service standard for the country.
Because without standards, we don't know what's happening in our services. We do not know the quality of care that we provide until it is measured by some kind of standards that we have established. I think that's important. Infection control, environmental safety, and all of these things also covered in the standards as well.
The minister said he will not change anything in the department, but continue to make sure medical supply remains a priority in the country. Rayon Lakingu, National EMTV News.
The former Minister for Health, TwoK, has called on all citizens to accept change if there is a change of government in the coming vote of no confidence. The minister said the people must refrain from activities that may cause riots and allow this democratic process to take place. He said, as a young democracy, it is everyone's responsibility to make sure that democracy is working in the country.
If the vote is and the government is changed, I'm also appealing to our people that accept the change, because this is a demonstration of young democracy that is at work. Many nations today, when you watch CNN, the government changes, there is a riot, there is chaos on the street. And we, Papua New Guinea, has to now continue to demonstrate that our young democracy is working.
Some members who defected from the PNC party during the weeks leading up to the May sitting of Parliament met with the Prime Minister Peter O'Neill to say sorry for deserting the party and returning to the PNC camp. The members include Member for Kirrawinna Goodenough Douglas Tomuriasa, Talasia MP Francis Maneke and Sohe MP Henry Amuli. In a small reconciliation ceremony held this afternoon at the PNG Forest Authority headquarters, the members said their action is not in the best interest of the people they represent. They said they have seen more development through this government and will continue to support the PNC-led government. Garden foods and 6 pigs were presented to the Prime Minister and other government ministers who were there to witness the occasion.
Significant today, because I see that with me in a very important team, which is headed by Honorable Peter ONeill, who is the Prime Minister of Papua New Guinea. We can deliver for my people as well.
Not good enough hasn't seen much development in the last 40 years plus. And I have my roads that will be sealed in the next couple of weeks, from the station up to the airport. I have my airstrip that will be sealed to discuss in our own house and resolve the differences that we had. Everybody has got a different view about life. Nobody has got the same view with each one of us. That is why differences of opinion will always take place in a big government like ours.
You're with Thursday's News. We'll have more of today's other stories when we come back. Stay with us. Welcome back to the news. Hela provincial government has released nearly 20 million kina for school fee assistance in its education sector. Hela Governor Philip Uneill says the funds have been cut back due to outstanding royalties and benefits withheld by the national government. Governor Uneill says Hela will depend on its human resource in the future.
Governor Uneill was backed by Taripori MP James Marape and Komo Magarima MP Manasseh Makiba to release funding for Hela students enrolling for the 2019 academic year. Uneill says a chunk of Hela's grants from the national purse remains unaccounted for. He says the 6 million kina is part of the IDG funds in 2018.
6 million kina is part of the 19 million kina IDG we obtained last year. 13 million we've channeled to all our schools in the province.
Taripori MP James Marape says the welfare of the province will bank entirely on its level of education. Marape says despite the political hype and lawlessness in Hela, its education sector will be supported. He spoke of the increase in number of girls passing out of Hela schools to tertiary institutions.
You may struggle 1 year, but let not that struggle kill your spirit to make it and live out and succeed in this country. There's a bright prospect for our country. There's a better prospect for our province. A better time lays ahead of us. Get engaged in real study. Divorce yourself from buai and marijuana and drugs.
Hela students attending tertiary institutions in Port Moresby received their share of subsidies yesterday. This also includes public schools and church-run colleges.
And we will continue to extend our support. All we ask from our people is allow the politicians to play our part in politics, but keep the law and order in your hands. Continue to support our kids.
Now, every child right across this country must be given a fair opportunity. This country is not only for the affluent that is based in Port Moresby. That is why I'm fighting.
Institutions outside Port Moresby will be receiving their subsidies next week. Jock Lepalve Jr., National EMTV News.
Chief Pilot of North Coast Aviation in Lae, George Thiel, says they need government support to continue providing air services to rural areas. With villages in rural parts of the country having limited access to roads, people rely on air transport. Mr. Thiel says until roads are built into these areas, the government should look at subsidising costs for these services.
We receive no subsidy from the government, and I believe the government, until roads are built into these places, I believe the government needs to provide subsidies to operators like us to keep the villages viable until whenever roads are in place.
The Unitec Boomerang Road in Lae continues to be rehabilitated with work on the drainage nearing completion. Whilst the actual road works is yet to start, the work on the drainage is expected to end this month. This is a stretch of road that has been long neglected and is now being worked on after 20 years.
It has been 3 months since work on the Unitec Boomerang Road began. The current phase of the project, which involves building the drainage, started here at the Telecom Road junction earlier this year. Work has now progressed to the University of Technology's main gate.
Yes, at the moment we are doing the drain works only for right-hand side and left-hand side. For the right-hand side, we're almost done, like 98%. And left-hand side, we're almost 70% done.
This 2-kilometer stretch of road has been neglected for over 20 years. The road conditions worsened over time with heavy rains. Work is finally being done to improve the roads. According to project engineer Jovelyn Reyes, work on the drainage is expected to be completed by the end of this month before the actual roadworks can begin. Lucy Kopana, National MTV News, Lake.
National MTV News continues with more stories, including stories making headlines overseas, when we come back. Welcome back to the news. Turning overseas, the Pacific's first international medical team has been set up in Fiji to respond to emergencies around the region. New Zealand's putting in close to $1 million towards the team, which has its own hospital and can treat up to 100 people a day.
11 disasters, 26 outbreaks, and that was just in 2018. Every year the Pacific grapples with serious emergencies. Now there's more help at the ready.
Teams like this one in Fiji are critical to save lives in the first days and weeks after a disaster, and this team will deploy completely self-sufficient.
The World Health Organization has helped set up the team, providing support and training. The group includes 4 doctors, 11 nurses and a pharmacist.
We are able to provide various types of medical assistance to up to 100 patients per day. FEMAT will be able to do this within 24 to 72 hours.
The mobile field hospital includes power, water and all the things needed for triage and emergency care. New Zealand, through its aid program, is funding nearly $1 million over 3 years towards the team.
The Pacific is prone to disasters, cyclones, volcanoes, health emergencies, and so strengthening the capacity of Pacific countries to deal with major medical emergencies is really important.
Climate change means more intense and destructive cyclones are on the cards. The emergency team is now one of 25 that have been set up worldwide.
They now join a small group across the world who have reached this really impressive benchmark.
While the region struggles to cope with unpredictable natural disasters, the emergency team is at least something it can count on.
A cast of colourful characters could decide the makeup of Australia's next government. Both major parties are hoping they won't need the minor players to form a government after this week's elections.
Clive Palmer's on billboards and television across Australia.
United Australia Party. Put Australia first. Make Australia great.
The millionaire is expected to spend more than $50 million on his political campaign and advertising blitz, including 5.6 million unsolicited text messages. And there's his own game, where Clive gathers Tim Tam biscuits and squashes political rivals.
This is not to do with the mainstream politics, if you like. It's to do with doing something of a social good for the community.
The outspoken Pauline Hanson argues otherwise.
Has he had to buy his candidates? Is he buying his votes?
The One Nation leader worried she's losing votes to Palmer after a party scandal involved wooing the US gun lobby for political donations. Former Prime Minister Tony Abbott must be worried too. Polling shows an Olympic medal-winning skier could take him out.
I can see someone just a few yards ahead, and I'm determined to run that person down.
Zali Segal is an independent candidate.
The time for political parties is moving on.
She's in a campaign with 15 others, many of whom pose a real threat to incumbent MPs.
Political parties have failed us.
In fact, polling shows 20% of voters are looking outside of the major political parties. They've lost confidence in Liberal Nationals and Labour after years of infighting. In 9 years, there have been 6 different Prime Ministers.
I think a once-in-a-generation opportunity to change the game, to actually do things differently.
In this close race, all 151 seats in the federal parliament are up for grabs, as well as 40 of the 76 seats in the Senate.
More than 24 world and business leaders have pledged to do more to rid the internet of violent extremist content. America's biggest tech firms such as Facebook, Google and Twitter joined the initiative, but the US government stayed away.
Big tech and big government putting on a united front against extremism online. In a summit dubbed the Christchurch Call, French President Emmanuel Macron and New Zealand Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern welcomed heads of state and Silicon Valley to Paris and clinched a commitment from 26 parties to try and curb the viral spread of violent content.
The Christchurch Call to Action and Action Plan for Change is a global response to a tragedy that occurred on the shores of my country, but were ultimately felt around the world. It ultimately commits us all to build a more humane internet.
Part of the effort will come from countries reinforcing existing laws, with Canada, the UK, Ireland and others signing up to the pledge.
For the first time, countries from all over the world were present, and secondly, it is an appeal which brings together not just governments and social and tech companies, but also the civil society, and we expect tangible results.
The White House declined to join the call, but US tech titans did throw their weight behind it, from Facebook to Google and Amazon to YouTube, committing to identifying offensive material sooner and making sure it isn't amplified by algorithms. The summit was organised in the wake of the mass shooting of 51 people in Christchurch, which was live streamed and shared millions of times thereafter. Facebook, whose checks and balances struggled to cope with the spread of the video, issued a separate statement announcing a new one-strike policy for those who misuse the live streaming tool. Though Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg, who met Macron alone last week, was absent.
So I think we all recognise in this meeting that this is not something that any company can do on its own. In fact, it's not something that the industry as a whole can do on its own.
This was a high-profile gathering, but many will question what was actually achieved. The recommendations are broad and non-binding, and some have been heard before.
It will take more than a day in the Elysée to clean up the dark corners of the internet, but starting to work together is at least a first step towards fixing its flaws.
The long-running British TV programme The Jeremy Kyle Show has been axed after the death of a guest. British MPs have announced a probe into all reality TV shows over the duty of care they owe participants.
Popular TV for over a decade, but described by some as a beer pit. And it's into that beer pit grandfather Steve Diamond waded before being found dead at his home last week. He'd filmed an episode where he failed a lie detector test over alleged infidelity. ITV, which airs the show, has now canned it.
I think ITV have dropped it, partly to contain some of the damage, partly to stop these damaging headlines from infecting other brands, other big programmes, and partly because they just don't think the tone of it is very 2019.
Today, TVNZ also confirmed they're cancelling the New Zealand broadcast of the show. In a statement, the company says the well-being of individuals involved is the #1 priority for any production, and like ITV, they'll be moving on. Armed Forces veteran Fergus was told the show wanted to set up a meeting with his estranged daughter to build bridges.
That's where I believe my character assassination started. He just absolutely tore into me.
But many participants were happy with their care, and counselling is offered. Loyal fans
on the show, but actually there's so many positives about it that people just don't tune into.
The cancellation comes as ITV faces scrutiny over the Love Island reality show, and as a former Australian Married at First Sight contestant raises concerns.
Destroying the lives they claim to help.
Someone is going to die. That someone was very nearly me.
As British MPs launch an inquiry, the TV marketed as real could be facing a new reality.
Later in the news, we'll bring you the funeral for the family that was murdered in Mount Hagen. But up next, we'll come back with TwoK Sports.
TwoK Sports.
Welcome to TwoK Sports. It is not easy to get into the National Rugby League competition in Australia. It takes consistent performance over a certain period to be noticed by NRL clubs. Two players from Papua New Guinea, former SPPNG Hunters, are making their presence known in the Queensland Intrust Super Cup as reliable players in their teams.
Edene Gebi and Nixon Put are former SPPNG Hunters players doing exceptionally well in their respective teams in the Queensland Intrust Super Cup competition. Edene is playing for the Wynnum Manly Seagulls, while Nixon Put is playing for the Notts Devils. Edene is doing well, playing at fullback for the Seagulls. In 9 appearances, he has scored 5 tries and so far has total running meters of 1,976, which is impressive. Nixon is also doing well. In 8 appearances for the club, he has scored 3 tries for the Notts Devils club. As a second row forward, he has played all out 80 minutes per match with a total of 184 tackles so far. Those statistics are impressive and is catching the eye of the NRL clubs in Australia. In a recent article run by a media company in Australia, had Brad Fittler, the New South Wales State of Origin coach, describing Edene Gebi as a prospect for the NRL season next year. Their former coach Michael Marape is happy for the two players and is always in contact with the two and encourages both to keep a consistent performance at club level.
You know, the clubs overseas, they don't look at one game only. They don't look at 5 games. They don't look at one season. They look at the whole. They can be watching you all throughout the years. They're doing well down there. So I've been talking to them. I spoke to Edene today again, and all it is just go out there, do your job again, same week in, week out. He's been doing well, especially Edene with his club there. So.
But as a mentor and coach, Marape knows both have the potential to be picked up by NRL clubs who are always on the lookout for exciting talent from Papua New Guinea.
I won't be surprised if 1 or 2 NRL clubs pick them up from in Brisbane. Yeah.
Fidelis Sukina, National EMTV Sports. In response to recent issues highlighted by Platinum sponsor of Central Dabaris, Vitis Industries, CEO of Digicel Cup Stanley Hondina says all teams in the competition have equal rights and benefits across the board. Hondina says in relation to merchandise promotions, sponsors are given equal opportunity and directives by Intercity Rugby League Competition Board on how best they are able to promote their brands.
In last week's news conference, sponsor and Vice Chair Lady of Central Dabaris, Vicky Mohsin, directed these 3 questions towards the Intercity Rugby League Competition Board. 1, why gate takings at every home game were not distributed. 2, sponsors not allowed to promote and sell merchandise on location. And 3, a proper naming right. In response to these questions, CEO of the Intercity Rugby League competition, Stanley Hondina, says all teams in the competition have equal rights and benefits across the board.
We understand that this game exists because of the franchises that are putting a lot of money to support the teams. It's just that they have to follow guidelines that we have. We have competition sponsors. As long as their brand doesn't compete with our sponsorship participation agreement, we've given them slots that they can promote their local sponsors. They have to leverage it to get value for it. Companies will sponsor. The return on investment is just visibility and marketing, and that's what they have the rights to do. It's up to the teams through their franchise managers again how they organize themselves to do the merchandise, but we want them to do it properly.
Hondina says there are certain guidelines that teams and sponsors are allowed to follow and that no one is treated differently. In terms of merchandising, Hondina says sponsors are very much aware of where and how they can promote their brands.
Well, all teams are aware of it. We have 2 relay stages that we carry the logos on, 1 on the jumpers and 2 on the playing pitch. So on the playing pitch, there's certain allocation. We do a 50-50 split. 50% of the field comes to us as competition, 50% go to the franchises with the local leagues. So they share 25 each. And it's spelled out in the guideline where they can put their banners and we can put their stuff like that on.
Meanwhile, Hondina says the inclusion of the 2 new teams, Gimbe Cutters and Central Dabaris, in this year's competition has really brought the level of competition to the next level.
with the inclusion of Central Dabaris and Kimbe Karas, it certainly added that bit of flavor into the competition. If you see the trend of the team coming through, there's a lot of Highlands teams in there. There was one or two of the coastal part of it. But now that we've got these two teams in, like you see the central flavor in it. The inclusion of Kimbe Karas and Central Dabari, of course, added value to our competition, and we are pleased with how they are doing. Dabaris have done exceptionally well for the start, first 6 games. Karas are still pushing, but that's the norm of the game. It's still early days. They just came in and they have to stay in there and work on it. But as far as governance and administration is concerned, we are quietly confident and comfortable with their inclusion into the competition.
Godwin Eki, National EMTV Sports.
The Kumul Petroleum Holdings National Soccer League has pointed out some challenges for the Highlands Conference. Teams in the Highlands Conference are Simbu Angra, Aporamai, Mount Hagen, Engalaima, Goroka Blue Kumuls and Kagwe Rave. All the teams play in Eastern Highlands and Goroka at the National Sports Institute. Papua New Guinea Football Association is looking into building fields for the member associations so that each team won't be burdened to travel to Goroka every weekend for matches.
The Highlands Conference is because they don't have a field themselves. So they must all travel to one location, which is Goroka, to play the match. One of our vision and strategy now for PNGFA is to fix every MAs and their fields. But because of the constraint that PNGFA has right now financially, we cannot do that by FIFA. Those are challenges I face too in PNGFA. So we need to find a common ground for them, which is in Goroka. And it's a very hardship. But these teams and these clubs, out of passion, they're traveling up to get football going. So one of our long term is to build a field for them, do it so that they can play their home game.
TwoK Sports continues with more after the break. Stay tuned.
TwoK Sports.
Welcome back to TwoK Sports. Prince William's teamed up with some top former football players to help shed more light on mental health. The new campaign aims to use football to help end stigma attached to it.
What do blokes talk about in the football changing room? How about this?
Suicide, for instance, is one of the highest killers of young men under the age of 45. That's an appalling stat. The guys, this should be a turning point where we can really kind of maximise the reach and the potential of everyone involved.
I'm left-footed, so mind yourself, Dan.
There are famous faces in Dan Walker's new BBC documentary, but also everyday men facing the everyday reality that mental health is fragile and sport can offer a solution.
It's not just the game, it's the camaraderie, it's the people that you play with, it's that exertion on the field. For that hour and a half, you're somewhere else.
The London Marathon is one place where we've seen members of the royal family promoting their Heads Together charity. Well, next season there will be a partnership with the FA. English football will be dedicated to mental health awareness. That was the concept launched at Wembley today.
We want to highlight some of the ideas and solutions that fans themselves have developed for tackling their mental fitness. And we want coaches and specialists to share their experiences of how to help other people who are struggling. We will use our national game to spread the message that mental health isn't a sad, difficult topic. It is just part of everyday life.
Football, it's certain, generates attention.
Life often imitates football. 1 minute you're on top of the world, and the next, your hopes and dreams can be snatched away.
If football, for all who play and watch it, can represent something progressive, then very little else can match its influence.
And that ends TwoK Sports. Up next, there were the details for the next 24 hours.
TwoK Sports. TwoK Sports.
This weather update is proudly brought to you by Money Plus. With you always.
A look at the weather forecast for tonight and tomorrow in the southern region. Evening showers in Port Moresby, fine weather in Daru, Alotau and Popondetta, and a shower or two in Kerama. In the Momase region, fine weather in Ley and Wau, a shower or two in Medang and Wewak, and Vanimo partly cloudy. In the New Guinea Islands region, fine in Lorengau, Kavieng, Kokopo and Rabaul, cloudy weather in Kimbe and a shower or two in Buka. And in the Highlands region, partly cloudy in Mount Hagen, fine weather in Goroka, Kundiawa, Mendi and Wabeg.
This weather update is proudly brought to you by Money Plus. With you always.
Before we go, it was a packed Sioni Kami Memorial Church today as family, friends and relatives bid farewell to Silingo Lamu, the woman who was brutally murdered, along with her 2 children and babysitter in Mount Hagen more than a week ago. Annette Cora was at the funeral service today.
Lives gone too soon and in a horrendous way for that matter. The late Silingo Lamu, her 2 girls and their babysitter tragically murdered by her husband last week. Silingo had a job in Mount Hagen and lived with a man who would later murder her daughters, while the children lived in Port Moresby with her parents, her father a policeman. Her babysitter, who was based in Ley, travelled to Port Moresby, picked up the girls and headed to Mount Hagen to live with their mother. This was 2 weeks before they were murdered. Family and friends gathered today to bid farewell to the trio and their babysitter Maggie Molo at the Sioni Kami Memorial Church in Port Moresby. Late Silingo's character was described by those closest to her as full of life, vibrant and a lot to offer back to the company she worked for in human resource and who they saw as a potential candidate to be stationed in Mount Hagen.
A wonderful mother and a wonderful human being. Your loss will be keenly felt. Our sorrow cannot be expressed in words, and all we can say is that your farewell has created a huge void.
My nieces and my sister, you are missed. You are missed every day. And there are no words to describe the void that we feel. I think the strength that I have to stand up here and talk to you today is because Silingo was a brave and courageous girl.
Taking his hat off as Commissioner for Police and a close family friend, Gary Bucky said parents should at all costs, regardless of marriage, must always keep in touch with their children and grandchildren and be informed when necessary.
As a father, it comes back Lomi Platuna. He haunted me because as a father and as a parent and as a grandfather as well too. I give him plan ting lo mi plan sa mo pigini meri lo mi plan all man isa maritim all man maritim all boli lookout molo all tumuna lo mi plan by all papa blong lookout all sila kan ting come as a Papua New Guinean. These things haunt you.
Meanwhile, the perpetrator involved is currently behind bars in Mount Hagen. Motives for his actions are still unknown to police. Late Silingo was the 5th of 6 siblings. The 4 will spend the night at their family home at Bomana Police College before leaving for late tomorrow to be laid to rest at Bukawa village. Annette Cora, National EMTV News.
Meanwhile, suspect Christopher Camo Johnson, allegedly involved in the double murder of his wife, 2 stepdaughters and babysitter in Mount Hagen last week, was charged yesterday. He was charged with 4 counts of willful murder and will appear at the Mount Hagen Committal Court next Monday. Detectives did not specify the motive behind the murder, but generally said it happened through gender-based violence. More details of the murder case will be made known during the court hearing next Monday. And that ends National EMTV News. Here is a look at our top stories again. Attorney General flags stay order on vote of no confidence. Marape calls on Ombudsman Commission to table UBS loan report. And PNC defectors say sorry. And on behalf of the entire EMTV News team, pleasant viewing for the rest of this evening. Good night.